Now before we get started with today's video, I want to point out, yes, I do know that my GPU loop is a little bit lower than my CPU loop. It takes longer for this loop to bleed because I have two radiators on its side. And then once it completely bled, I just haven't topped it off yet. Today's topic is something I'm actually asked a lot about in my inbox, especially since doing the build log on the latest Skunkworks 4.628B. I don't know, I lost track of what version we're on. And that's going to be motherboard water blocks. Are they necessary? Do you need them? Should you use them? Or are they all just for show? April is Creative Rewards Month over at VideoBlocks, and for a limited time, they have a special offer where you can get a 1-year subscription for only 99 bucks. That's 90% off the normal rate. But it doesn't stop there, because not only do you get access to their unlimited download library of 115,000 Adobe After Effects clips, backgrounds, templates, motion graphics, you also get a 1-year access to their VideoBlocks library of over 100,000 sound clips, royalty-free music, sound effects to make your content just as good as it could possibly be. A 1-year membership to VideoBlocks, including a 1-year membership to VideoBlocks. That is a no-brainer for content creators. Now there's two videos I want you to check out if you haven't seen before we actually do this. And that one is going to be the how to install a motherboard water block, and you're gonna find that right about here. And then the other one being the final build log for the Skunkworks version 4.362B or whatever version I said it was. And you can find that right here. That way you're up to speed on what parts and stuff are being used. But I get this quite often, and anytime I make some sort of a main change to Skunkworks, my inbox on all of my social media platforms and stuff, which you should be following, by the way, especially with a giveaway coming up here, is it really necessary? Did you have to put in a VRM water block? Did you see any differences? Why would you want to do that? So today that's what we're gonna cover, because it's not something I've ever really talked about in depth. Now before you can understand what the VRM blocks are doing, you have to understand what a VRM is. And on your motherboards and your graphics cards, VRM stands for Voltage Regulator Module. Now you have 12 volts being sent out of your power supply. Actually you have a 12 volt side, a 5 volt side, and a 3.3 volt side, but we can talk about that later. When you've got 12 volts being sent over to the CPU socket, trust me, your CPU is not using 12 volts. In fact, my CPU right here is using 1.3 volts, which is overvolted for an overclock. Typically, it's gonna be more like 1.095 or 1.1 when it comes to Intel's turbo speed step. On AMD, it tends to use a little bit more, about 1.35 to 1.4, and overclocks get closer to 1.5 volts. So clearly, 12 volts is not being made its way to the CPU. If it did, your CPU would go pop, just like that, with a nice little puff of blue smoke and that unforgettable smell of fried electronics, fried hopes and dreams, and green money that you should have just burned, because it would have been more climactic than hearing the little pop of a CPU explode. I've done it before. It's kind of fun, but that smell, it lingers, and it's a reminder of failure. So the VRM, or the Voltage Regulator Module, is responsible for stepping down the voltage to the level at which it needs to be used. So in the CPU's case, you're stepping 12 volts down to 1.3 or 1.2 or 1.1 or whatever. Now the amount of phases you have, as we talked about in a different motherboard video that you guys can check out on my channel, each one of those phases is another filter for stepping down that voltage so you get nice steady supply. You don't want that voltage fluctuating a whole bunch, you want it to be steady. Now because you have to take all that voltage and step it down, that energy has to go somewhere, and what happens is it translates into heat. The module gets really, really hot, the voltage is turned into heat, and then it's basically dissipated into the atmosphere. It's literally wasted, but that heat has to be handled and it has to go somewhere. Now normally on the motherboard you have a heat sink, and there's no fan or anything on there. What's responsible for removing that heat from the case are the case fans or any fans you place inside your system blowing air onto the motherboard or whatever. The problem is VRMs can get very hot, and then the heat sinks can become very inefficient, and then sending that heat into your case can heat up everything inside your case, especially things on the motherboard around the VRM and even the CPU itself. So when you add a water block to the VRM, you are taking all of that heat and adding it to your water loop, usually what your CPU loop is connected to, and then you are sending that to the radiator and out into the atmosphere, and most of that heat is not actually making it inside the case, which is keeping things cooler as a whole. Now, one of the common questions I get associated with one of the common questions I get about VRM water blocks is, do they aid in the stability of overclocking? Well, I think that's really going to depend on your particular situation. If you live in a very hot climate and your VRMs start to get too hot, they can become unstable and not do a good job at filtering that voltage step down to whatever your ending voltage is. And then what leads to instability is not so much that the VRMs are hot, but because the voltage is fluctuating, and CPUs don't really like fluctuating voltage. When they go under load, they want that power delivery to be constant, and they don't want it fluctuating around, because sudden dips or V-droop can lead to instability, because when your CPU is under load, it needs every bit of power that it feels it needs, and if suddenly it doesn't get it, you either will get a random restart, shutdown, blue screen, whatever form of instability you might have. The higher the overclock, usually it can lead to just a flat out system freeze or crash. Now, VRM water blocks are typically not needed. VRMs are designed to run hot. I mean, when the engineers design this stuff, they know it's going to run hot. They try to put adequate cooling on there, but what really helps in VRM temperatures, more so than just water cooling them or having a beefy heat sink, is how many phases there are, because the more phases, the more split that power step down is, and as a whole, they can run cooler. But most people will put VRM mother blocks or even chipset water blocks like here on Skunkworks, more of an aesthetic thing. I'll be honest, I did it because I think it looks cool. I like to water cool. I like to do custom stuff with water cooling, so I want it to look as blingy as possible. But it is something that can help overall in overclocking stability if you live in a very hot climate. Let's say you live somewhere like, in Australia or India or North Africa or whatever, wherever you are, guys. Everywhere has hot temperatures, some hotter than others. But as the air temperature is hotter going through your case, the less heat you can actually absorb and remove. So that's where water cooling as a whole would be more beneficial than even just water cooling the VRMs. Now, chipset cooling, to me, that's just a niche. That's just a, hey, we've got blocks going everywhere. Why don't we just throw a block on the chipset as well? The chipsets tend to not get too hot. In fact, chipsets have a very thin heat sink on there. They're underneath the graphics card half the time. Most of those graphics cards are even blowing hot air on top of the chipset heatsink, and it's not really going to be a problem. That's really ultimately just one of those things that really comes down to the bling factor. Is there a downside to running motherboard water blocks? Well, it really depends on the motherboard. For instance, my Gigabyte board here didn't have a monoblock or one block that's designed to mount to the CPU that also touches the VRM. EK has started making monoblocks for many motherboards where it's one block that handles VRM and CPU. Now, they're a little bit more expensive, but they're cheaper than getting a CPU block and a VRM block and chipset block all together. In fact, on ITX boards, they've made even monoblocks that touch everything on the motherboard: chipset, CPU, and VRM, which cuts costs down even more. But in my case here with the Gigabyte SoC Champion, it was an additional $115 to get the motherboard water cooled. Typically, that's not going to be worth it to most people. But if you're doing some sort of an aesthetic build, then it definitely helps make it look better. And if you're doing, enthusiast builds like this, looks are just as important as practicality. Now, ultimately, you have to make the decision on whether or not that's something that's interesting to you or something that's worth it to you. It's your money. I can't tell you $100 is worth it to you when it might be to me. That is purely subjective, based on your situation, and only you can answer that. But what I wanted to address in today's video was the practicality and the necessity of it versus the bling and just the eye candy. And I do find motherboard water blocks to be more towards the spectrum of bling and eye candy versus necessity or practicality. Guys, I hope today's talking head video where we talked about motherboard water blocks was helpful to you. Again, this is a topic pulled straight out of my inbox. If I get enough requests to do certain videos, I will definitely do them as you saw today. So if there's more things you want to know about water cooling, PCs, overclocking, gaming, graphics cards, whatever, make sure you put it down in the description. Also too, down there you can find links to Amazon affiliate codes, which really do help the channel. I know everyone says, use my Amazon, but I'm gonna say use the Amazon affiliate code for the YouTuber you think deserves it most, even if that's not me. But if that happens to be me, the links are down there and every little bit helps, and I certainly appreciate that. The last shameless plug I'm gonna post here real quick is, again, make sure you guys head on over to VideoBlocks. Check out their April deal right now. It's a hell of a deal, especially for content creators looking to step up their video production as well as their audio game. As you guys know, audio is everything when it comes to YouTube channels. In fact, I place audio as one of the most important things when it comes to content creation. And you guys should definitely check out that deal right now. Look in the description, you guys will find the link to go over there. Again, it lets them know I sent you, which is the whole point of me plugging that and taking sponsorships, is they want you guys to know that, hey, Jay's audience is the best and they support him and us, and that's a huge deal. Lastly, check out the car channel. Link to that also in the description. The description's gonna be like 50 million lines long today. But link to the Cars and Vlog channel there. Got some more stuff coming up. Did a whole new suspension on Izzy. I think you guys are gonna like it. All right, that's enough shameless plugging, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and head on out of here. If you stayed to the very end of this video, do me a favor, in the comments or on Twitter, do hashtag #JayWon'tStopTalking. And then I'll know you made it to the very end of the video. All right, guys, time to go as always. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.